All right, hey guys. So this is going to be a short introductory lesson into the topics we're talking about in Unit 3, which is imperialism. And we're going to be looking at the United States and how imperialism shaped really the latter 19th and 20th centuries, and really how it shapes us as a country moving forward. So in this, we're going to look at what is imperialism and how is it relevant. The learning target for this is to analyze events that led to American imperialism during the late 19th and early 20th centuries by examining the events connected to the territories of Hawaii, Cuba, China, and the Philippines. Important vocabulary is going to be imperialism and natural resources. So, imperialism, in its most basic definition, is the policy of expanding the national territory, power, or influence of a nation beyond its current borders. Imperial powers use military force to take control of foreign territories, exerting political, social, cultural, and economic control on those territories. Throughout the 19th century, European countries would invade and take control of most of the landmass on Earth. The two largest countries that are going to do this are going to be Britain and France, and they're going to develop enormous territorial empires throughout the continents of Africa and Asia. Other European countries like Germany and the Netherlands and Belgium will also get involved with this, acquiring smaller empires. The territorial expansion was both driven by and facilitated by the Industrial Revolution that takes place in Europe. Industrial capitalism requires natural resources in order to produce the goods and services that drive economic growth. So they need those raw materials, the iron, the timber, the minerals, in order to manufacture all of these new goods that they're capable of making. And this starts in Europe, and Europe doesn't have a lot of natural resources. So they have to look outside of their borders in order to acquire these natural resources. New innovations of the Industrial Revolution, in turn, will facilitate imperialism across the world, meaning it's going to help imperialism. Most importantly, the invention of the machine gun is going to allow European troops to invade and conquer most of Africa, all of India, and most of Asia in just a few short decades. As international relations scholar Samuel Huntington explains, he says, "The West won the world not by superiority of its ideas or values or religion, but rather by its superiority in applying organized violence. Westerners often forget this fact. Non-Westerners never do." Economics drives imperial expansion. Imperial expansion drives economic development in countries in the imperial core. The countries with the power to invade others and take their natural resources do so. As you can kind of see on this map, Central America, South America, Africa is kind of all dug out here. And then what they've dug out, all those resources, are all piled up in Europe and the United States and Canada here. So that's kind of the idea behind this little cartoon, is they are digging out the resources and taking them for themselves. The impact of imperialism on the countries that are invaded and colonized is pretty devastating. The wealth of Africa and India, Australia, and much of Asia was essentially stolen by Europeans, and this made European countries rich and fueled their industrialization. But this also left the colonized countries poor and underdeveloped, because they could no longer access those resources, develop them, and have economic growth like the European countries could, because their resources were being taken. The divide that we see in the world between rich and poor countries isn't natural. It's a direct result of hundreds of years of imperialism and colonialism by rich European and American countries. The United States, looking at us now, we started as 13 colonies. Our entire existence was fueled by England's imperialistic goals. The 13 colonies were an imperial project by Great Britain. The colonies were created to take land from the indigenous Americans in order to provide raw materials for the growing British economy. Particularly, we were looking for gold, we were looking for timber, we were looking for silver, we were looking for iron. Following our independence, the United States started its own path of imperialism by expanding westward. Right, we just got done talking about Western expansion and manifest destiny in the last unit. The western border of the United States was referred to as the frontier and steadily moved across the continent of North America until it reached the Pacific Ocean. We ended up taking land from Mexico in a war. We took land from the indigenous peoples as the country expanded. This is a form of imperialism, right? We're using military force to expand our borders or expand our land acquisition beyond our own borders. When westward expansion of the United States reached the Pacific coast, expansionist Americans started looking west across the ocean for more places to expand. We looked to Hawaii, the islands between North America and Asia. We looked to Alaska. And we looked to the immense natural resources and the markets of Asia. As the Gilded Age and economic production grew, and the American economy produced more and more goods, American business owners and government leaders realized that Americans themselves were incapable of buying all the goods being produced. Remember when we talked about the working conditions in the factories and things like that? American workers during the Gilded Age didn't earn enough to buy the products that they were producing. They didn't make enough money, right? Remember, fathers had to go to work. Mothers had to go to work. They had to send children to work in factories and mines just to get by. So they weren't able to buy all of these new goods and services that were being manufactured. So rather than slow down production and slow down economic growth, economic planners looked westward. We looked to China. We looked to Japan. We looked for new markets to sell our goods. Right? We looked for other countries who were looking to industrialize and needed access to raw materials in order to do that. They needed access to steel. They needed access to iron. They needed access to trains and railroads. Right? So we looked to these Asian markets, these countries that we're trying to develop, and we said, there's our customer base. But the Pacific Ocean is enormous. Right? It's hard to get across at this time. The Pacific covers about 30% of the Earth's surface. Right? 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water. 30% of that is the Pacific Ocean. To cross it with goods for sale in Asia, American ships would have to refuel on the journey. Right? At this time, they're using steam engines that are fired by coal. Right? You shovel coal into a furnace. It burns. It heats up a boiler full of water that creates steam. Steam moves the engine parts. But in order to get across, we need to stop and refuel along the journey. And to ensure that American businesses controlled the Pacific, the United States was going to need a really strong navy to do so. And we would need naval bases in order for these ships to stop at that were far from U.S. shores. So a man by the name of Alfred Thayer Mahan advocated the U.S. government to expand its military influence by gaining control of Pacific islands and establishing naval bases on them. These bases would give the U.S. Navy authority over the Pacific Ocean and enable American businesses to dominate trade with Asia. Mahan believed that the United States should build a large and powerful fleet, similar to that of England. And by doing so, we could become one of the strongest global powers. However, the expansion that would likely lead to conflicts with other major empires. Right? Here's a theme we're gonna start to see now that the United States starts to enter into this imperialist era. Any country that is practicing imperialism, that's going around and knocking off other countries and taking territory for their resources and that, any country practicing imperialism will eventually come into conflict with another country who is practicing imperialism. Mahan's ideas emphasize the importance of naval power in securing national interests and global dominance. That brings us to Commodore Perry and Japan. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry was sent on a voyage to open Japan to trade with American businesses. At the time, Japan was the only Asian country that had not been invaded and not been colonized by European powers. The Japanese had maintained a fiercely guarded independence and continued many social, economic, and political traditions. They didn't let anybody in. They didn't let traders come in. The only ones they did let come in were the Dutch, and they were allowed to trade at one port. Other than that, Japan was closed. Nobody could get into trade, which means they couldn't come in and influence. They couldn't come in and see what kind of resources they had, what kind of land was there. So everybody kind of left Japan alone in a sense until Matthew Perry. When Commodore Perry arrived in Japan, he came with modern warships and opened up the closed Japanese economy. Essentially, what he did was he parked all of these warships in the harbors of Tokyo and pointed all of the cannons at the city and said, hey, you're going to open the ports to us and trade with us, or we're going to decimate the city with these guns. And miraculously, the Japanese leaders realized that their traditional ways were causing them to fall behind of the U.S. in terms of power. And they looked at the warships and the technology and really just the infrastructure of the United States at that time and said, hey, we need to modernize our economy. We need to start building a strong military because all of these other countries in Asia have been invaded or conquered or colonized except for us. And we have two choices. We can modernize and industrialize, build a strong military and become a world power, or we can be taken over, colonized, have what resources we do have taken from us, and be like all of these other countries in Asia. And Japan chose the first option. They wanted to modernize and establish our own empire, which they start doing. Japan starts buying from the United States. They start buying steel and trains and other natural resources, machinery to start modernizing their economy, start industrializing and building their military. Then they start practicing imperialism and start taking territory for resources and things like that. Right? And as we said, anytime a country practicing imperialism, eventually they will come into conflict with another country practicing imperialism. That happens 100 years after Commodore Perry goes to Japan. And the war between the American and Japanese empire will start on December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese launch a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, starting World War II. So this is imperialism. Again, it's a country using military force to expand its influence beyond its borders. And in this unit, this is what we're going to look at, is how the United States starts using imperialism to grow ourselves into the world power and to grow into the status of world power that we currently hold. Right? Thank you.